Are there any other ancient practices or things in the monastic life that you think either like very tactical things that can contribute to flourishing?
Mm-hmm.
You have we have the 4 pillars. Are there any other tactical things or other principles that you've learned that have helped you in entrepreneurship and business and your personal life?
Yeah, so many things. Like, I mean, one story is actually it's probably you asked this earlier. Like, what I noticed things in myself in the monastery. This kind of connects some of those dots. Actually, remember the first Saturday of the monastery. It was, they were like, time to clean the chapel. And they gave me this like little dust mop, and it was just like it was like this long, and the chapel seemed to be like St. Peter's, like just stretched forever. And they were like, "Okay, go clean the chapel." And I'm like, "With this
What?
little mop?" And like, this is on Saturday morning, and I'm cleaning this chapel. Like the dust, there was hardly any dust on the chapel because it was just cleaned last week. So, but that's what you do. And I remember just cleaning the chapel, and like I noticed this like frustration within me, this kind of like angst or like, and yeah, I gone to all these fancy schools. I grown up with like cleaners. I hadn't really cleaned stuff. And you're trained in Harvard Business School. It's like, well, you want to outsource things that like, so you can move up the kind of utility ladder,
Right.
And I'm like, so this was very, like, wait, someone else should be doing this, or we can outsource this. Like
we can pay someone to do this, yeah.
and then I could go like do more important spiritual stuff, and this isn't, this is going on within me while I'm doing it. And so I'm just kind of like angsty with it. And I feel that. And you know what? I ended up cleaning that chapel every Saturday for 2 years with this tiny, very inefficient like dust mop that I like wrung out with my hands. And so I was in, it ended up being the best thing I could do.
That's crazy.
It ended up being the best thing I could do because I needed that.
Right.
I needed to like do something that I didn't really want to do, that I think was a waste of time. And I started to realize through that, like, how can I actually make this a meditation and a prayer to like clean in a way that's like, I'm not in angst, I'm not frustrated. It's being united to all the millions of people throughout world history that have to clean. That's part of being human. We have to clean, one, and then two, offer is an offering for others and prayer for others. And then three, like I started to realize that work is less about what you do and it's more about how you do it. And in the US, in a Western context, it's like, oh, what job do you have? Like, what are you doing? What, in DC, the most common question you get when you meet someone is like, oh, what do you do? And it's actually more important how you do something. And that's part of the monastic insight, is how you're approaching what you do. And what you do is less significant, actually. You could be cleaning, you could be gardening, you could be, speaking to 1,000 people about some really important spiritual matter. Like, that's the same, actually. It's how you're doing it. Are you doing it with peace in your heart? Are you doing it with your excellence? Are you doing it with love, and with God? And so that was a great, now I'm still working that out in my life, and wrestling with that. But it is a very powerful insight that the monastic spiritual tradition has that I think could be helpful for life.
Yeah, it's not what you do, it's how you do it. I've been utterly fascinated by how there's this kind of resurrection of ancient religious practices because of modern science. So my favorite example of this is fasting. Yeah. So for thousands of years, monks from different spiritual traditions have been fasting. It's just kind of like what you do. And now in these last I would say 5 to 10 years, there's all of this science and there are these, these longevity hacks. And a lot of them are like, do a 3-day water fast because it cleanses your cells and it leads to clear thinking. And I remember going on like this maybe 6-month intellectual bender where I was just like going through like the Bible, different spiritual traditions, and trying to see like what maps onto modern science. Another example is like raw honey. Raw honey is apparently one of these superfoods from modern science that like if you have it before bed, it increases testosterone, boosts your sleep, all this stuff. But if you look, that's like the most mentioned or one of the most mentioned foods in the Bible. So I've just been, and I think there's this like movement kind of back to a lot of these ancient things, which is one of the things reasons I think kind of your knowledge about the different monastic pieces are fascinating. The fasting, the silence, all of these things are things that we need desperately in the modern world. Did you guys have? I'm sure you had to fast in the monastery.
Yeah,
Some of it.
we did. Yeah, we did. You'd fast, especially like during Lent on Fridays, and other times throughout the year, you'd have some fasting, and you could kind of request more, opt in or experiment. So I did some experimenting with that when I was.
Don't
in
the
monastery.
Carmelites do? They do the Great Fast, or don't they fast for like 7 months or something?
So there's an old kind of old traditional fast called the Black Fast, where it's like it's basically vegan diet. You have no animal products from the exaltation of the Holy Cross, which is a feast day in mid-September, through the end of Lent. So it's like
more than half the year, right?
Yeah, more than half the year. So we didn't do that in the Carmelites, but that is an old traditional fast.
Wild.
A lot of early monks and hermits like just live on bread and water.
Basically. Are there any of those other things you've come across either with your work on monk mindset or in the monastery, like those things about the ancient tradition that are just holistically proven true because of modern science?
Fasting I think is one that's definitely kind of resurrected, no pun intended. I think, the silence and the prayer and meditation, like, there's all these studies, I think they look more at Buddhism, Buddhist monks, of like how the brain reforms, and how there's longevity and more peace and all these things related to that. And so that's something that's been there since in the Christian monastic spiritual tradition for a long time. Another thing I would say, like kind of another practical thing is like in the monastery. I remember another story, like I was in the morning for one I would experiment with a lot of different diets and stuff like that, and everything. At one point I was
back when you were
in the monastery.
In the monastery you were experimenting with diets.
When I had there was some of the monasteries here. One of the monasteries I was in, we could do some meals on our own, and so you could test more. But
interesting.
One of the monasteries, it was like every meal was set for you basically, and like that's a practice of itself. It's like there's so much focus in culture now of like, I can't eat this and I have to have this thing at this time, whatever. And it's like most monasteries, it's like you eat what's set before you. And so, which is a detachment, which is like, this may not be exactly what I want, but I'm actually detaching from what I want to eat. And so I make myself available to eat what is set before me out of gratitude and love for the people that have prepared it, and appreciation, which is a good in many ways. So, and then there was some where we didn't have as many, and then there can be good in like experimenting a little bit and knowing about yourself a little bit more. But anyway, so the one monastery I was in, where like I think I was making toast sometimes, and I would just leave the toaster out. Like a lot of times in a kitchen you have a toaster out. It's like that's just part of the kitchen. And I'd come back later in the day from class or whatever, and the toaster would be put away in a drawer. And I'm like, why is the toaster put away? And then I would put it back out and I'd make toast, and then he'd put it away. And I was like, there was one of the fathers who he just loved having like clean space everywhere. It was like everything would be open and clean. Like the less you could have on a counter or a space, the better. And it's very open. And so I started just putting it away, like one, not to bother him, and then two, but also because I started to appreciate that. And our rooms would be that way too. You spend so much time in your cell, as it's called, like a cell of the body, but also like a prison cell is kind of named after that, where it's like that's your place where you live and dwell in your cell, and like you spend so much time there, you want to have this interior space of detachment and openness, and so our external environment does shape us, and so if you have a lot of clutter and stuff around, like it's gonna create chaos internally. I have a friend who's always like, it's kind of not the neatest and very messy, and it's like this person's always like, I have so much to do, or like, God, I need to be doing all these. I think it's part of the environment that's like forcing that within. And if your space is open, then it's going to create an interior openness within us as well. And so, to the extent we can keep things orderly, tidy, clean, open, it's going to create more of that space within us.
There's a lot of great research now. I don't know if you've ever read Atomic Habits, James Clear,
Yep.
but he has some great research on that, on how like the physical conditions that you're in affect 100%. How well your brain's working.
Yeah.
And I know there's a bunch of these really successful guys, like Bill Gates apparently cannot work if there's like dishes in the sink. Just has to like clean the dishes. Everything needs to be clean. Separate, right? Fair.
You're right. I don't know about him, but
But the point is just that he needs order in order to work well.
Yep. Especially if you have like more engineering. It's like, okay, everything needs to be structured and in its place and whatever else. But
I just wonder how much better my grades would have been if I'd cleaned my dorm back in college. Surely they would have been better.
Still to come with John Cannon.
I was about 6 years into the monastery. He was diagnosed with a terminal illness. They let me go home and be with him over Thanksgiving. And it's first Thanksgiving I'd been home for in 6 years. I ended up staying with him for a couple months, helping to kind of care for him and be with him when he was dying. And then I went back to the monastery. It hit me like a ton of bricks. Like if you've ever gone through trauma or something very intense, things can happen within you very deep down in ways that are like don't make any sense rationally. Things can be unlocked within you.